Hello, everyone. My name is Zimmermann, and I work for BearingPoint in Germany as a business development manager. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. And in the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be talking about open source software in M&A transactions. Okay, first, let's take a look at the agenda. So I will be starting with a brief overview or introduction of BearingPoint, and after that, I will start to discuss the risks of the use of open source software in M&A, then talk about the open source due diligence process, and finally describe some principles of how a OSS auditor should work. All right, coming to the next slide. Let me really quickly give you a short introduction of our company. BearingPoint is a partner-led global technology consulting company, and we're about 4,600 employees worldwide and had a revenue of about 750 million euros in 2020. And in 2019, BearingPoint founded the business unit BearingPoint Business Services. That is where we combine all of our software products and our software-related services. That's also the unit where our open source software team is located. Okay, let's start with today's topic. As I said, I would like to start with the risks associated with OSS in M&A transactions. First, I want to talk about the risks associated with the use. And overall, we see the main risk in this context is the loss of value of the target. And this is equally important for buyers as well as sellers. Why is that? If you take a software company or a company that derives its main value from software, this value is tied to the intellectual property right and or the right to use, respectively, to commercialize the IP. And this can be limited by the use of open source software. So first, there is the business model invalidation. That means the business model as a whole that might be affected by OSS, and some OSS licenses require that any work derived from the OSS must be also licensed under the OSS licensee. These licenses are called copyleft licenses, and there's one prominent example. It's the GNU, the General Public Licensee, GPL. And in addition to the source code disclosure requirement, the GPL does not allow to charge any licensing fees. So in many cases, the business model of the target is based on revenues from licensing fees. So this will no longer be viable in this case. Second, there is the software IP invalidation. Many copyleft OSS licenses, including the GPL, they require that the source code of derived works must be made available. And, depending on the integration of the OSS with the proprietary IP of the target, this could mean that all IP of the target must be disclosed in the source code form. And this might considerably impact the valuation of the IP, this, depending on the business model, of course, in this case. As third point, there is the business case invalidation. To remediate all the just mentioned risks here, this can be very costly. It means that the copyleft licensed OSS code has to be removed from the product. And in this case, the missing functionality then has to be replaced by own development or by other OSS under a more permissive licensing. In the case the copyleft functionality is a core component or platform, this could mean a complete redesign and re-implementation of the IP. And this cost must be factored into the investment business case. And as a result, this can become less attractive for the buyer. And in addition, the buyer might lose interest because of the remediation and may cause a considerable delay. In addition to these main risks, there can be security issues derived from the use of OSS, and that's something that should also be taken into account as well. There's also proprietary software that can be also affected by OSS in regards to security vulnerabilities. So OSS communities, they usually react very fast and fix these issues, but it's up to the user of the OSS to monitor the communities, obtain the fixes, and update the components that are used. Okay, let's move to the next slide, to the involved parties here. So let's look at the different needs and connections from the involved parties of a transaction. As we discussed the potential risks coming from the use of the OSS, the buying party needs to become aware of these risks, of course. The difficulty for the buyer is that in most cases, he does not have access to the source code before the transaction closes. Of course, this is in the nature of things that a seller in a transaction does not want to reveal all of its trade secrets before the deal is closed. For sure, wouldn't make sense for the sell side, but therefore it is virtually impossible for the buyer to uncover the risks during the due diligence phase. And, the target, on the other hand, they need to justify the valuation of its IP, and also should be aware of possible compliance and security risks that might come with the use of OSS. To address these conflicting interests, there's a neutral third party needed, and this can be an OSS auditor to provide an independent assessment of the risks. The OSS auditor typically then gets access to the source code, performs the risk analysis, and provides this risk analysis and remediation report to the buyer. With this approach, the target does not have to disclose any of its proprietary IP to the buyer, and both sides can still fulfill their needs in regards to their specific needs and risks here. Coming to the overall process, let's look on the general due diligence process here. This one, it consists of 6 consecutive steps, and all the 3 mentioned parties are involved here. It starts with a kickoff meeting in which the process and the timeline will be discussed and will be set up. And after that, the target and the OSS auditor need to sign an NDA regarding the source code to be analyzed. And as we said before, this highly confidential information has to be handled accordingly. Of course, that's why this process step is also of importance here. And after that, the target prepares the code base for the analysis and provides it to the OSS auditor. This is done via a secure connection. The OSS auditor performs then the risk analysis in the next step. We will come to this process in more detail on the next slide. And after the risk analysis is completed, the OSS auditor presents and explains his findings to the acquirer. Usually the target is also part of this discussion, and they can comment on issues that have been found and reported. In the last step, target and acquirer agree on mitigation and remediation measures, and of course on a timeline when and how to do that. Let's take a little bit deeper look on the risk analysis process within the due diligence. This can be split into 4 steps, and it starts with the code scan. This process step is usually done automatically with a scanning tool. The scanning tool decomposes the code and compares the entities with entries in the database. For an accurate analysis, it's important that the tool is able to detect OSS code snippets. These are small pieces of code which are copied by the developers into the proprietary code base. And this is actually something that happens very often. For example, this code from sites like Stack Overflow. In the Stack Overflow case, the copied code is licensed under a strong copyleft licensee, and this would affect the code base partly or even as a whole. We're using the product FOSS ID that's now part of Snoop, which has very superior snippet detection capabilities and comprehensive knowledge base as well. So then the output of the scan, that's a list of matches which must be manually reviewed in the next step. And then there comes the identification of the OSS components and licensees in the next step. This process is done in a manual way. And so what you do is here, all matches need to be analyzed to determine the OSS component where the matched code originally comes from. And as a next step, all licensees that are applicable to these components will be identified. The bill of materials will be created, which includes all components and all licensees here. After that, the bill of material has to be examined for potential copyleft issues and for licensee conflicts. And also it has to be checked which other code might be impacted by copyleft by taking into account how the OSS component is actually integrated into the source code. In this step, the OSS auditor also determines possible mitigation actions. All of these findings they will be summarized in the respective OSS risk report, and that will be provided to the buyer side in the end. And coming to the last step, the OSS auditor finally performs a query in the National Vulnerability Database in order to see if any security vulnerabilities are recorded for the OSS components in the bill of material. The OSS risk report contains detailed information about all security vulnerabilities that are found. So that's the risk analysis process. And, let's come now to the last slide. This is how OSS auditors should work, at least from our point of view. So I would like to highlight 4 key points here on how OSS auditors should work. We consider these points to be very important when it comes to dealing with OSS due diligence and have employed these practices in many transactions over the past years. So first, there's secure code base handling. As the code is at the core of the evaluation, the secure handling by any involved party is for sure an absolute must. The code must be transferred and stored securely in a data center operated by the OSS Auditors. So this is a very important step here, and a very important principle to keep in mind. Also, the access to the code must be limited on a strict need-to-know basis. Second, there is transparent cost and confirmed delivery dates. Delivery dates must fit in the overall transaction timeline and must be cast in stone. And this is quite important for the success of the overall project, and to be strict with the timelines as well. And the pricing must be transparent upfront, and should be without any surprises for the client side, of course. And third, we consider independent from tool vendors as important as well. So the OSS auditor should be able to choose the tools which best fit to the analysis needs. Independently working with market-leading scanning and analysis tools, this brings value to the client, and of course it also makes it easier for the OSS auditor to perform his work efficiently and deliver the best results. Fourth point, time matters, especially in M&A transactions. They usually have a very tight schedule, so the OSS auditor must react swiftly and flexible to inquiries and deliver the results on time. So it is important to keep up with the client's timeline and have standardized processes in place that guarantee a fast delivery of the project. In the past years, we have seen in many deals that these points are quite crucial for the collaboration and also for the end result. Yeah. Okay, so that's it from my side so far. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, that you can take away some useful information from this here today. And if you have any questions or would like to get in touch, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much.